Hello, and it's good to have you join us again on Maritime Radar. Trade has a key role to play, although it has been underexploited in Africa. Specifically, emerging policy reforms may provide a required drive for progress. The establishment of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, known as AfCFTA, and the emphasis on boosting intra-African trade are key priorities of continent's development vision. The African Union's Agenda 2063, the future we want for Africa. This rather ambitious trade agenda is reinforced by the important trade-related targets that are included as means of implementation for the SDGs, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda contains several other trade elements for Africa. Creating a single continent-wide market for goods and services, business and investment will reshape African economies. The implementation of AfCFTA would be a huge step forward for Africa, demonstrating to the world that it is emerging as a leader on the global trade agenda. Assessing the impact of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement on the African economy, if implemented, are some of the issues that will be on the front burner on today's show. I'm Norma Obiora Madu. In Africa, both the processes and degree of regional integration have lagged behind expectation, and many political commitments have either not been translated into policy and regulatory reforms or are simply not implemented. The region thus remains weakly integrated, with continuing tariff barriers, for example, where restrictive rules of origin cannot be met. Global markets offer important opportunities for companies in developing countries by exporting to larger markets. This will increase production, growth, and employment rather than focusing on smaller domesticated markets. Developing countries like Africa must overcome severe hurdles before being able to export to global markets. Looking at this critically, regional markets become the required testing ground for these companies. Barriers to accessing markets in the region are often lower than those of the global markets, as they share similar tastes, standards, distance, and culture. Before we get further into today's lineup on the program, let's find out the latest in maritime news.
In Nigeria, the federal government has established a 5-man joint ministerial committee to mediate and resolve challenges faced by the Association of Maritime Truck Owners, AMATO. The committee, made up of representatives from the Federal Ministry of Transportation and the Federal Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy, was announced by the Minister of Transportation, Said Alkali, during a meeting with AMATO and Nigerian Association of Road Transport Owners, NATO delegations in Abuja. The minister explained that the committee's formation was prompted by the union's intention to embark on a nationwide strike due to issues such as truck destruction, driver brutalization, and illegal tariffs. He further emphasized the crucial role of the association in Nigeria's economy and urged AMATO and NATO to engage in dialogue. The joint committee, chaired by Oloruntola Olufemi, Permanent Secretary of Marine and Blue Economy, is expected to provide findings and recommendations to the minister within 2 weeks. Nigeria's total imports in the second quarter of 2024 stood at 12.4 trillion naira, a 10.71% decrease from Q1 2024 and a 97.93% rise from Q2 2023. This is according to the latest foreign trade statistics data released by the National Bureau of Statistics. China remains the highest trading partner on imports, followed by Belgium, India, the United States, and the Netherlands. The total merchandise trade in Q2 2024 was 31.8 trillion naira, a 3.76% decrease from Q1 2024 and a 150.39% rise from Q2 2023. Exports accounted for 60.89% of total trade, with a value of 19.4 trillion naira, a 1.31% increase from Q1 2024 and a 201.76% rise from Q2 2023. Crude oil exports dominated export trade, valued at 14 trillion naira, representing 74.98% of total exports. Non-crude oil exports stood at 4.8 trillion naira, accounting for 25.02% of total exports. The report highlights the performance of various sectors, including solid minerals, manufactured goods, and agricultural goods, providing insights into Nigeria's trade patterns and trends. The Senegalese Navy has recovered 17 additional bodies from a migrant boat that capsized off the coast, bringing the death toll to 26. The Atlantic migration route from West Africa to the Canary Islands, commonly used by African migrants attempting to reach Spain, is one of the world's most treacherous. The ill-fated vessel, a wooden fishing boat known as a pirogue, was carrying over 100 migrants from Senegal. It capsized just 4 kilometers into its journey, according to state broadcaster Radio Television Senegalese. The Senegalese Navy launched a search and rescue operation, deploying 3 boats and a Spanish plane. According to the European Union's border agency, there has been a 154% increase in migrants using this route in 2024, with 21,620 crossings to the Canary Islands in the first 7 months. Spanish authorities warn that up to 150,000 more migrants from Africa may attempt the crossing this year.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Maritime Radar. The African Continental Free Trade Area presents a major opportunity for African countries to bring 30 million people out of extreme poverty and raise the incomes of 68 million others who live on less than $5.50 per day. With the implementation of AfCFTA, trade facilitation measures that cut red tape and simplify customs procedures would drive $292 billion of the $450 billion in potential income gains. Implementing AfCFTA would help usher in the kinds of deep reforms necessary to enhance long-term growth in African countries. AfCFTA agreement will create the largest free trade area in the world, measured by the number of countries participating. The Act connects 1.3 billion people across 55 countries with a combined gross domestic product valued at $3.4 trillion. It has the potential to lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty too. But achieving its full potential will depend on putting in place significant policy reforms and trade facilitation measures. In this chat, with Dr. Obiora Madu, Chairman, MULTIMIX Group, and a trade expert, shares the impact of AfCFTA full implementation. Stay with us. So it's good to have you again on the show.
Thank you.
Let's start this conversation having an understanding of what African Continental Free Trade Agreement is, and why do you think Africa needs it, and how has it fared?
You know, Africa has been struggling. We have AU, before then we had OAU. All these were attempts to bring Africa together. Even the thoughts of a common market started a long time ago. But I think the time has come. Now, the aim, statistics shows that Europe and Asia and other continents, in terms of trading between one another, is very high. African trade is about 12% as recorded, while Asia is about 50, Europe is about 60. So if you look at the gap, it means, we have some African companies who import from Europe or elsewhere what is actually in Africa. Those they're importing from actually bought it from Africa. So they need to do something about it. And Africa's contribution to global trade generally, very poor, about 4%. And yet we are 20% of the world population. And yet most of the natural resources are here. So something must be done. The problem. So then the idea of a common market, a market of about 1.4 billion people, the largest single market in the whole world, bringing all African countries. Prior to this time, there was a lot of regional, this thing like ECOWAS, COMESA, all this East Africa, and the rest of them. But that didn't solve the problem. The founding fathers felt that if we could come together into a single market, it will help our competitiveness, it will help us to trade among each other, and it will help us to make more contribution to global trade. Let me tell you, when this AfCFTA thing was announced, some people were almost on the streets celebrating. I didn't share that high optimism because I know, having been a trade person all my life, I know that it's a lot of work. There's no free lunch anywhere again, even in Freetown. So I knew that a lot of work will have to go into it in terms of infrastructure, in terms of planning, in terms of policy review, a whole lot of work. Therefore, did I expect that as if it was a wave of hand, something will happen? No. So I am not going to say we have not fared well. I can only say we're making progress. I think we're on course. Negotiations in some aspect of services are still going on. The negotiations for goods seem to have been wrapped up, but it is not full implementation yet. So far, so good.
We will look more at the trade barriers and policy reforms later in this conversation.
Okay.
So, but there's something you mentioned concerning individual economy. So, as important as this trade amongst African countries are, we must consider also internal economy, which is what I was said earlier. But you said if we continue to protect it, how do we go? So, but then how do we now ensure this balance? While we can protect our individual economy, but we also come together as one. How do we ensure this balance?
The world is going beyond protectionism.
Okay.
The world is going beyond protectionism. And that is, of course, one of the things that WTO will fight. See, we live in a flat world where your competitors are no longer your next door neighbor. Therefore, you have to actually, specifications in the world are one. There's none for third world country, there's none for second world country. That means you're either running a world-class company or you're planning to close down in this very market that we are today. Therefore, the nations must go back to address the issue of competitiveness. That is one of the biggest problems we have among all African countries. Take Nigeria, for example. Logistics cost of export of commodity is what is killing. Speak to exporters and then you will understand what component of their cost is logistics. It is not only here. So we need to, because we will need to develop that competitiveness first from within. Then as infrastructure is built across Africa, then we can tap on that, trade among ourselves. And those infrastructures will also make it easier for us to make contribution to the global trade. So that is that. It's not, protectionism is not the answer. The answer is go and develop, and then so that you can compete with others. There was a time that Nigeria and Malaysia were battling for the Portuguese market in palm oil. Nigeria has an advantage because the distance between us and Portugal is close. Malaysia had a disadvantage of distance. Government collected 50% of the freight. What are they trying to do? To make their own companies and products competitive, to be able to compete with Nigeria who had a shorter distance. So these things don't happen by accident. There must be intentionality on the side of policymakers and government. I don't know if you read something about our airport and cargo, the cost that, I think it was ADB president who said it. Of course, he was referring to what those who are practicing the trade said, that you need about $37,000 to load 100 ton of plate in Nigeria, but in Ghana, 5,000. So
that's why we are losing our market.
So that is it.
Because we are not competitive.
The country manager of DHL said that we seem to be the only country where their cargo plane will bring goods and they will buy sandbags to balance the plane to be able to fly out of Nigeria.
It's sad. But in this mix, where do you think Nigeria will excel in AfCFTA?
Let me start from agro, which is, of course, what everybody talks about. It's in value addition. You can't carry cocoa from Nigeria to Cote d'Ivoire. Neither can you carry it to Ghana. But you can carry chocolates to everywhere in Africa. So value addition is the key. You see, people don't understand
Which is the major challenge we have here.
Yeah, which is the major challenge. And why do we have it? It is not that people don't have capacity of but anybody who is doing production in Nigeria, bow down for the person. That's why I respect Dangote. Look at, for a few days, his whole head turned gray. That's what it takes to do business in Nigeria. So value addition is fantastic, but ability to do it is where the challenge is.
We are due for a break. When we return, we'll be looking at eliminating trade barriers and also policy reforms that should shape AfCFTA. That will be after the short break. Please stay with us.
Africa needs its own storytellers, people who understand the continent because they're from it. People who know that news is more than just a conversation starter, it's our stories. Because these stories run deeper than headlines and segments. It's about digging deeper to get the facts and telling the human side of every single story, not just the echoes from foreign headlines and perspectives. It's time to take back our narratives and share them in our voices. The birth of Africa's New Age reporting, and this is where it begins, right here at News Central TV, with stories that put Africa first.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Maritime Read, and I still have with me Dr. Obiora Madu. He is the chairman, MULTIMIX Group. Before we went on that break, you had mentioned earlier in this conversation about eliminating trade barriers. So let's look at it. What progress is Africa's Free Trade Pact making in terms of eliminating these trade barriers and deepening economic integration and driving the continent's development?
I think discussions are ongoing. The speed might not be as much as
but we need that speed.
Expect. We do need the speed. We do need the speed, but public sector...
Because we are running behind time already.
You see,
and we are still
the private sector is running faster than the public sector. That is the big challenge.
So at
we
what
need
point,
to drag them along.
Yes. At what point do we put this balance? Because we need this balance to move forward.
Certain countries that are very strategic to the continent, we need to take a lead. It's not enough to say that we are giant of Africa. We need to take a lead, even in those policy reforms. If Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, Kenya take a lead with these policy reforms you're talking about, it won't take time. I mean, the EPA of Europe, it was ready for signing. Nigeria said we're not going to sign. All those smaller countries in Africa, they signed, but yet Europe was not satisfied. They want Nigeria. I think South Africa didn't sign. And if you lose these two countries in Africa, so what do you still have? So that's why I say that those big countries need to take a lead. And I can tell you, you don't need to coerce for the smaller countries to join. And they have a smaller system, which if you succeed in conquering the big one, it will be very easy for them to conquer.
But after success depends on significant policy reforms.
Yes.
But since these countries are not taking a lead, so what do you think we are succeeding?
If I am skeptical, about the success of AfCFTA. That's one of the reasons. These policy reforms, can it happen? How quick will it happen? Those are the two major issues that will affect the success of AfCFTA.
Those two questions making it look hopeless and making this beautiful idea look
it's not hopeless.
Look ambitious. Or
it's not hopeless. This is exactly the reason why when it was announced and people were dancing on the street, I was a bit skeptical. Because as a professional in the trade, I know, look, policy somersaults is what happens in most of the African countries. So policy reforms towards that single goal of the entire Africa.
But are you saying that
more than?
Are you saying that leaders in the continent are not seeing the beautiful impact this will make in moving us to global market, alleviating poverty, changing our economy? Are they not seeing this?
They are seeing it.
Does it take so much to ensure that these policy reforms are done?
I'll give you an example. If you write a proposal to a ministry, you send it to the minister's office. It will come down to permanent secretary. It will go to director. It will go to deputy director. Go to assistant director. And when it wants to come back, it will come back through the same routes. So I think we need to start with public sector reforms.
Changing this bureaucratic
Exactly.
bottleneck.
Exactly. Because as you and I, as private person, we can just say enough is enough, and you do something. A permanent secretary, a minister can sack a clerk, a cleaner, because there is something called civil service rules, which you can't go against. So these are the reasons why
They are
you
not
have the
bringing up to
bureaucracy.
speed to with time to relate with this 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, while dealing in certain things, there's what they call 70-20-10 in training, which helps fast to organizations to grow. And I stumbled on the fact that some governments in the world are implementing it. Some governments, Australian government and some others, are implementing these things. Some of them are implementing Lean. Some of them are implementing Six Sigma. But
So it's a matter of choice.
exactly.
So after we make Africa competitive, I know we've talked about so many things in the course of this conversation, but as a trade expert and for emphasis sake, what should we do now?
One of the things we must do is capacity building. There is a general lack of trade logistics knowledge in the continent. For that to happen, we need to indigenize curriculum to address the challenges that we have. Some foreign certifications and the rest of them that people are taking does not address, like there's one trade logistics certification. When we started it, I looked at it. I said, okay, it will tell you about what happens in this place internationally and the rest of them, but how do you navigate the challenges at the ports in Africa? How do you, documentation issues? How do we reduce documentation? Because that is part of facilitating trade. And a whole lot of other things. So capacity building is the first thing. The second thing is infrastructure. We have discussed it. In fact, most of these things we have talked about. Then awareness. AGOA will be 25 years next year. What have we done with it? Duty-free, quota-free, everything. 6,400 items. Enter America, duty-free, quota-free. What have we done? We're exporting oil. So, again, back to political will and intentionality. From people, top people. They need to understand, they need to get private sector.
Involved.
Or rather, yes, and
Or maybe to drive
some
it.
government agencies is where we should start. They become quasi-government. That means about 80% private and 20% is in the Export Promotion Council in Cote d'Ivoire. It's 80% private, 20% public. So if we start that with agencies, that will be the beginning. Then you can start creeping into ministries and attack this devil that they call civil service rules. Change it for good. Then policy reforms can happen. Things can move faster. And after we'll have opportunity to grow.
Wow. It's been beautiful. AfCFTA is a very beautiful idea. Is it ambitious? I don't think so. But we require political will, intentionality, partnership with private sector, capacity building, and knowledge around this. These are the words or ideas or views of Dr. Obiora Madu, Chairman, MULTIMIX Group. I must thank you most kindly for your thoughts and time. Thank you for these beautiful revelations. I hope that our governments are listening and they will be able to do something with the solutions you've provided in this show. Thank you.
My pleasure, always.
Thank you, sir. And that's a wrap on this week's episode. I hope this episode was able to assess the implementation of AfCFTA to its success. Join us every week on Maritime Radar to explore factors that will ensure the development of the maritime sector in Africa. You can also expect the latest in global and local maritime news and industry insights right here. I'm Norma Obiaswalo. Many thanks for your time and see you again next week.